In the 18th century, there were 13 British colonies in North America. They developed rapidly. Cities were built, trade expanded, colonists managed farms, and people began to feel increasingly independent. However, Great Britain viewed them primarily as a source of revenue. Colonists paid taxes but had no influence over the decisions made by Parliament in London. This contradiction became the main source of the future conflict. After the 7 Years' War, 1756-1763, the British government faced a severe financial crisis and decided to compensate for its losses at the expense of the colonies. New taxes were imposed on the American colonists, on paper, printed goods, and tea. Particularly outrageous was the so-called Stamp Act and the monopoly on the trade of certain goods. In response, the colonists popularized the slogan, "No taxation without representation." They considered it unfair to pay money to a government in which they had no representation. One of the most striking episodes of protest was the Boston Tea Party in 1773. A group of colonists, disguised as Native Americans, boarded British ships and dumped an entire shipment of tea into the harbor. This act became a symbol of defiance. In response, Britain imposed harsh sanctions, limiting the autonomy of the colonies. In 1775, the conflict escalated into open war. The first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. The colonists convened the Continental Congress, which created an army and appointed George Washington as its commander-in-chief. The war promised to be long and difficult, as the British Army was considered one of the strongest in the world. The key event was the adoption of the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776 in Philadelphia. The main author of the document was Thomas Jefferson. The declaration proclaimed that all men are created equal and endowed with the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If a government violates these rights, the people have the right to overthrow it. From that moment on, the colonies officially declared themselves the United States of America. The struggle continued for several more years. The Americans lacked weapons and experience, but they had determination and the support of France and Spain, who intervened in the war against Britain. The Americans lacked weapons and experience, but they had determination and the support of France and Spain, who intervened in the war against Britain. The turning point came with Washington's victory at Yorktown in 1781. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, under which Great Britain recognized the independence of the United States. Thus, a new state appeared on the world map, founded on the ideas of freedom and equality. These events became an example for many nations and had a profound impact on the course of world history. The War of Independence affected every resident of the colonies. Ordinary farmers, craftsmen, and merchants were forced to take up arms and fight in militias. Many lost their homes, which were burned by British troops or mercenaries. The economy fell into decline, prices soared, and in some regions famine began. Yet this difficult time strengthened the sense of unity. People increasingly said not "we are Virginians" or "we are residents of Massachusetts," but "we are Americans." The role of women was especially significant. They not only managed households and cared for families while men were at war, but also took part in the resistance. Women raised funds, sewed uniforms, and some even fought under male names. A legend arose around Molly Pitcher, the nickname of a woman who carried water to soldiers during battle and, at a critical moment, took up a cannon herself. George Washington's army constantly faced problems. Weapons, uniforms, and provisions were in short supply. During the winter of 1777-1778 at Valley Forge, soldiers suffered from cold and disease, but this was precisely when Washington's leadership qualities shone. He managed to keep the army from disbanding and maintained morale by personal example. Training was also transformed thanks to Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer who introduced European discipline and military tactics. One of the key events was the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. The Americans won a decisive victory over British forces. This success convinced France that the United States could actually win the war, and a formal alliance was concluded, dramatically strengthening the colonists' position. The decisive moment came in 1781, when the combined forces of Americans and French surrounded the British army of General Cornwallis at Yorktown. After weeks of siege, the British surrendered. This effectively marked the end of the war, though the peace treaty was not formally signed until 1783. According to the Treaty of Paris, the United States gained independence and control over vast territories west of the 13 colonies, extending to the Mississippi River. Britain lost one of its most important possessions, while a new republic appeared on the political map of the world. The American Revolution became the first successful colonial war against a European metropolis. It proved that a people could achieve independence based on the ideals of liberty and self-determination. This example inspired revolutionary movements around the globe. Within the country, the revolution laid the foundations of a democratic society. In 1787, the U.S. Constitution was created, a document that not only defined the structure of the new republic, but also became a model for other nations. The principle of separation of powers, the system of checks and balances, and citizens' rights all trace their origins to the American experience. However, it is important to remember that freedom and equality did not extend to everyone. Slavery persisted, and African Americans remained without rights. Native tribes also suffered, as U.S. expansion westward led to the displacement of indigenous peoples. Women gained new roles in society, but their political rights remained restricted for many decades to come. Although taxes and duties were the formal trigger for the uprising, the roots of the conflict ran much deeper. By the mid-18th century, several generations of colonists had grown up in America who no longer saw themselves as British, but as Americans. They had their own towns, trade, newspapers, and even universities. They lived on vast lands where they felt more freedom than the people of Europe. Therefore, when the British Crown tried to impose strict control over the colony's economy and politics, many perceived it as an infringement on their natural rights. When the unrest began, the colonies were far from a united front. The northern colonies relied on trade and crafts, while the southern colonies depended on plantations and slave labor. Yet the pressure from the mother country forced them to find common ground. This was when the First Continental Congress emerged, where the colonies began to act together for the first time. Pamphlets and newspapers played a major role in shaping public opinion. Especially famous was Thomas Paine's Common Sense, 1776. Where he clearly and simply argued that America must free itself from the British Crown. This text inspired thousands and became an ideological weapon of the Revolution. The adoption of the Declaration of Independence became a turning point. The document was not merely a statement of breaking away from Britain. For the first time in history, it proclaimed universal human rights at the state level. The phrase, "all men are created equal," became a foundation not only for American, but also for global political thought. Despite the wave of patriotism, the war itself was far from easy. Britain possessed a powerful navy and a professional army. The Americans lacked weapons and money, yet Washington managed to turn scattered volunteer units into a more or less organized army. Allies played a decisive role. France supplied weapons, funds, and a fleet, and even sent volunteers such as the Marquis de Lafayette. Spain and the Netherlands also provided support, hoping to weaken British influence. In 1781, the war effectively ended with the surrender of the British Army at Yorktown. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain recognized the independence of the United States and their right to vast territories west of the Appalachians. Victory changed not only the fate of America, but the entire world. The United States became the first modern country where the ideas of the Enlightenment were put into real political practice. In 1787, the Constitution was adopted, one of the most enduring in history, still in effect with amendments today. The American Revolution inspired other nations. Without its example, the French Revolution and many 19th-century national liberation movements might never have taken place. And that, my students, is how the American Revolution changed the course of world history forever.